What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my solo role-playing and wargaming channel. I'm the Lonely Dungeoneer, and this is episode 2 of Let's Play Original Dungeons & Dragons with Chainmail. In this series, we're exploring solo roleplay with original D&D and Chainmail, with a campaign set in the Misty Isles, and using, as always, the Mythic GM Emulator as our solo role-playing oracle. In the last session, we spent the majority of our time with Mythic, as our party of 12 adventurers gathered around a table at the Mindful Mouse Tavern in the city of Artois, collectively decided to take on a secret mission to infiltrate the palace of the Vampire Queen and rescue the Princess of Baylor. However, not wanting to rush into such a dangerous encounter unprepared, the party opted rather to first prove their mettle as a group by traveling into the Baylor Mountains to the ruinous underground caverns of the Dwarven Glory. When we last saw the party, they were in the middle of a 2-day period of downtime between their agreement made at the Mindful Mouse and the day on which they planned to assemble for the journey into the mountains. We learned that most of the party already has everything they need for this expedition and are choosing rather to spend their downtime with friends and family, making any necessary arrangements for their departure. In the second scene, we zoomed in on one party member in particular named Lila that became emotional meditating in the city gardens while considering the recent fate of the dwarves and preparing herself mentally for the journey ahead. Now, I mentioned in the last session that I plan to quickly transition between some of our party members to get a sense of what they're doing during this period of downtime. And that's still the plan, but I think instead of treating this as one long scene transitioning between party members, I'd rather treat each of these encounters as an individual scene in our story. So let's now cut away from Lila in the city gardens by asking a scene question. And just for fun, based on a comment I received in the last session, I want to talk a little bit about the default mythic scene structure and the fluid scene structure that I'm making use of in this campaign. When using the default mythic scene structure, we start a new scene by stating our expectations for that scene, and then by testing those expectations. We roll a 1d10 against the chaos factor. If we roll higher, then we play out the scene as expected. If we roll under or equal to the chaos factor, then we either alter or interrupt the scene before playing out the adjusted scene. After playing out the scene, we choose some moment in particular for the scene to end, whether this is a moment where the narrative has shifted, or perhaps where the characters have entered a new physical location. Whatever the case, when we end the scene, it's almost like the director calling a cut to the action. And at that point, we do some end-of-scene bookkeeping as well, such as updating our threads list and our characters lists, and updating the chaos factor, which is a moment that asks you to consider whether your party was in control of the scene or not. If the party was mostly in control of the scene and what they wanted to happen did happen, then the chaos factor should be reduced by 1 at the end of the scene. However, if the scene felt like it was spiraling out of control for the characters, then you would increase the chaos factor by 1 to represent that. And then you set your expectations for the next scene, and play continues like this throughout the adventure. Alternatively, the fluid scene structure, which I'm opting to make use of in this campaign, shakes the process up just a bit, most notably in how we begin and end scenes. Rather than choosing the perfect moment to call cut at the end of a scene, we instead ask the Oracle a scene question. And this is an intentionally loose mechanic that could potentially speed up your solo play by allowing you to keep your mind in the zone and asking questions rather than calling a temporary break to the action. We still test our expectations by rolling a d10 against the chaos factor and then by playing out the scene just like in the default scene structure. But we don't stop to bookkeep between scenes, choosing rather to add or remove characters and threads from their respective lists as they become relevant during normal play, and we don't stop to question whether the party was in control of the scene or not to adjust the chaos factor. Instead, quickly increasing the chaos factor when the next scene was expected, or reducing the chaos factor if the next scene was somehow altered or interrupted. And this all results in more time spent in action with a minimal mechanical difference, which for some people could result in faster solo play, and for me certainly does. So if you've never seen the fluid scene structure before, and maybe you were curious about it in the last session, hopefully this clears things up and you can better follow along as we roll for scene questions in this campaign. And if this sounds interesting or useful to you, I'd highly recommend checking out Mythic Magazine Volume 34. So now, let's ask the Oracle if the next scene is another look at how a different party member is spending their downtime. We're going to roll a d10 over the chaos factor of 4, and we get a 3. So no, this is another altered scene. And not knowing who they are or what they could be doing, I'll roll for a scene adjustment. We get 7, which is make 2 adjustments. Another 7, so we ignore this result, I believe. Okay, so I just confirmed to be sure, and yes, if you roll and make 2 adjustments a second time, you don't let them stack or snowball. You just ignore the second result. So we still need to roll for 2 and only 2 adjustments. So I'll roll again. The first result is a 2, so we're going to add a character to the next scene. That makes sense. And a 2, we're going to add 2 characters to the next scene. That's cool. So the Oracle's basically telling us that our next party member isn't spending this time alone. And because we rolled for another altered scene, we're going to once again reduce the chaos factor by 1 down to 3. So what is this character currently doing? Rolling for an action, we get 46, free, 59, free news. And then, like in the last scene, I'd also like to know where they are. Rolling for a description, we get 13, cautiously, 86, cautiously scary. These word pairs took me just a little extra time to interpret, but to me, they mean that this party member, are they a dwarf? I'll call that very likely, with a chaos factor of 3, that is a roll under 50. Yes. And are they a man? I'm going to make this a true 50-50 roll under 50, and we get 90, no. So another dwarven woman. Her name is 20, draw, 75, say. So I'll say Darcy, or Darcy rather, is currently sitting with their partner in creaking chairs, looking across a large wooden table at a tax collector in their office in the city. They're asking for extra time to make a payment, and they share news of the upcoming expedition, promising to first make good on their debts with any profit that comes from the adventure. Does the tax collector seem particularly stern or frustrated? As far as I know, they could be a kind person and having a great day, but we already know that the kidnapping of the Princess of Baylor has cast a shadow over Artaud, which makes me think that it's probably likely that this tax collector is at least somewhat obstinate. I'm going to give this odds of likely, which makes it a roll under 35. And we get a 91. An exceptional no, which to me means that not only is the tax collector not frustrated or obstinate, but rather they feel a deep sympathy for Darcy's family's situation. This tax collector commends her bravery and assures her that there will be absolutely no problem with receiving payment on her return. Darcy leaves the collector's office feeling invigorated and filled with a new sense of purpose for the approaching journey. Which leads me to the scene question. Is it time to move on to another party member's downtime? Rolling a d10, we get a 1, which, given the current chaos factor of 3, is going to trigger yet another altered scene. And reduce our chaos factor down to 2. We will see how this goes. So let's make yet another roll on the scene adjustment table. We'll get a 3, reduce or remove an activity. We've already used an activity reduction to indicate that the party was pretty much prepared for the expedition, so I don't think this activity reduction also means that. Depending on what this character is currently doing, and based on our expectation that party members are choosing to spend their downtime with friends and family and making arrangement, we could interpret this activity reduction to mean that this character is currently alone and not really doing anything to prepare for the journey. But I think that will also depend on where they're at and what they're currently doing. So let's roll now for an action. We get a 70, protect, and a 60, protect normal. And rolling for a description to describe their current location, we get 33, That is ferociously 87. Shocking. This character is protecting normal at a ferociously shocking location. Okay, to me, this means that this character lives in an extraordinarily run-down place. Maybe they have broken windows and garbage everywhere. And I don't think that their situation is solely due to a lack of funds. That may be one component of it, but I think that there's some sense of apathy or lethargy here. And not necessarily even due to laziness, but rather that overwhelming feeling that can cause people to tend towards inaction when they're surrounded by a mountain of problems that they don't have the energy or the motivation to solve. So I think that this character is currently sitting in their house surrounded by all of the same problems that they've had for the longest of times, and they're not really doing anything different to solve the problems in their home or to prepare for the journey. I'd imagine that they're currently lost in thought, but I don't know that for sure. So I'm going to ask the Oracle, and I think that this is very likely, and with a chaos factor of 2, that makes this a roll under 35, and we get a 43. That is a no. So they're not currently worrying or lost in thought or even thinking excitedly about the upcoming journey. They're just kind of existing. Is this character a dwarf? We're going to call this very likely. That is a roll under 35. 98, exceptional no. So not only is this character not a dwarf, but they're actually the furthest character race possible away from a dwarf. If we take a look at the character creation rules in original Dungeons & Dragons, and that is specifically in Book 1, Men and Magic, we can see that in addition to humans, we have dwarves, elves, and halflings. And I feel like humans and halflings are probably closer to dwarves culturally than elves, so in my opinion, I think that this new character is an elf. So this elf character is sitting alone in their home, and it is nasty, but it isn't bothering them one bit. Is this character a man? I'll once again make this a true 50-50, so roll under 50, and we get 07, that is a yes. And what is his name? Rolling for a name, we get 98, Ya, 23, that is L, and 93, a virtue. And the name's meaning table is actually pretty ingenious for doing that. In addition to phonetic sounds for us to sound out to build a name, we also have elements such as a virtue or a location or an occupation that we can use to generate a wider variety of unique and interesting names. And so, using the virtue kindness for inspiration, I'll name this character Yalkind. I have so many questions about Yalkind the elf now, but I don't want to spend too much time on any particular party member quite yet, because what I'm really looking for is a brief glimpse into their life that will paint a picture we can use to set expectations for how they're going to respond to events on the road. I will ask the Oracle, however, if Yalkin's horrible house is in the countryside of Arto, and I'm not sure, so I'll call this 50-50, which is a roll under 15 with a chaos factor of 2, and we get, the rolling is a 2 and a 3, 23, so that is a no. And notice here for a moment, if you will, the effect of the chaos factor on our adventure. We've reached an extraordinarily low chaos factor fairly early in the campaign, and notice the effect that it has on answers to our fate questions. As the chaos factor reduces, the answers to our questions are far more likely to be a no than a yes. And if we structure our questions such that the yes answer is usually the more energetic or active answer, then what this means is that as the chaos factor reduces, our adventure will start to tend more and more passive, which will certainly cause problems for our party. Consider, as an example, if the party was scavenging for food in the wilderness on the road. Let's say they needed food and they were scavenging, and I asked the fate chart if the party happened to find food while they were scavenging, while the chaos factor was low. Even if the party was in some bountiful location where we called the odds very likely, they would only have a 35% chance of being successful in their search, which is just to show you that an overly passive adventure isn't necessarily any better for our party members than an overly chaotic adventure. The party slowly starving to death wouldn't be any better than them being cut down in battle. That note aside, Yalkin's horrible house is actually located inside the city of Artois, and I can only imagine what his neighbors must think depending on where in the city he lives. But I think we've met our goal of getting a brief glimpse into his life, and that now could be a good time to fade away from Yalkin's solitary moment. And now we've been more or less properly introduced to 3 of our 12 party members. We've had Lila the dwarf meditating in the city gardens and having an existential moment. Darcy the dwarf pleading for more time to make good on her debts in a tax collector's office and getting that time. And Yalkin the elf sitting alone atop a putrid pile. And I have no doubt that some of you may already be feeling sympathetic for our characters, and dare I say, getting invested even. But before you become too hopelessly attached, I have an important secret to share with you. And that secret is that Chainmail is absolutely brutal. The vast majority of our party members, and perhaps even every single one, will be at risk as our adventure begins of being felled in a single blow by any opposing creature in the game. And this is a philosophy that's fairly typical in more old-school role-playing games. Here is a fair warning from me to you, the listener. Even if our adventuring party successfully completes the journey to the Dwarven Glory, once they arrive, there's a fairly good chance that anyone that actually makes the decision to delve into those subterranean tunnels will never be coming back. At its core, Original Dungeons & Dragons is a game about dungeoneers risking life and limb in perilous tunnels beneath the surface for a chance at fortune. But any human, elf, dwarf, or halfling that weighs the risks versus the rewards and still chooses to delve does so for unique and often intensely personal reasons. And we've just received a brief glimpse into the lives of 3 different individuals that have already made this decision. But we don't know yet if, in the end, they'll find what they're looking for, what they're really looking for, or if instead, at some point along the journey, they crash and burn. And so, if you make the choice to continue watching past this point, then please steel yourself mentally for the journey, because in addition to the typical depictions of violence, mortal decision-making, and crisis situations, in this campaign, we may also explore other equally heavy ideas, such as meaning, purpose, grief, and loss. Now, I want to do something fun. We've met 3 party members, Lila, Darcy, and Yalkin, 1/4 of our party of 12 to be exact, and I want to know now, for context, what their character classes are. So let's now really open up Min and Magic, lay out some blank character sheets, and work together through at least a partial character creation process for the 3 party members that we've met so far. Okay, I've opened my notes to the characters page, and we now have a character sheet for Lila, Darcy, and Yalkin. I also have Book 1 of Original D&D, Min and Magic, open to the character creation process. And for now, I'm just going to generate enough information to understand what character class each of these party members are, along with how quickly they could hypothetically progress in each of their respective classes based on their attribute scores. So let's get started with our very first party member, Lila. Lila is a female dwarf, and because she's a dwarf, she can only take the Fighting Man character class. Fighting men can make use of all weapons and armor, but perhaps most importantly, they receive bonuses to their hit dice, which could possibly give some of our party's fighting men, if they happen to roll a perfect score on their starting hit die, a guarantee that they can survive at least 1 blow in combat, which would be a complete game changer. Level 1 fighting men are called veterans, and are the only character class to start with 1+1 hit dice. Which means that when you roll for a level 1 fighting man's hit points, you'll roll a single hit die and add 1 to the total. And it's important to understand here that in original D&D without supplements, every hit die is a d6 and every damage die is a d6. And of course there are rare exceptions. For instance, Some specific magic swords deal extra damage against specific kinds of creatures. But in general, if a level 1 fighting man rolls a perfect 6 on their starting hit die, then they'll have a hit point total of 7, while most individual blows can score a maximum of 6 damage on a perfect roll. Which, if we're lucky, could allow some fighting men to tank 1 blow worth of damage and survive, therefore allowing themselves and other party members to escape from a losing or otherwise undesirable combat situation. And that is to say nothing of situations when an opponent can deal 2 blows to you in 1 round, but I digress. Each party member and any creature involved in combat is also assigned a fighting capability, which is used by Chainmail to arbitrate combat encounters. While a level 1 cleric or magic user will fight under Chainmail rules as 1 man, a level 1 fighting man will fight as man plus 1, which grants them the massive advantage of adding 1 to their attack rolls. I've noted on Lila's character sheet that she is a fighting man with the title of veteran, that she has 1+1 hit dice, and that her fighting capability is man plus 1. And while I could roll for her hit points right now, I'm going to make things even more terrifying by choosing not to roll for her hit points until she receives her first blow in combat. This is going to seriously heighten the tension. Next, I want to roll for Lila's ability scores, which will give us more insight into what she's like as a person, and will help us to understand what kind of experience bonus she's going to receive in the Fighting Man class. Every player character in original Dungeons & Dragons can be described in terms of 6 ability scores. These are Strength, Intelligence, Wisdom, Constitution, Dexterity, and Charisma, each of which is assigned a value somewhere in the range of 3 to 18 based on the roll of 3 6-sided dice. You'll find that just about every roll related to Mythic will be based on the D10, while every roll related to Chainmail will be based on the D6. A higher value for an ability score is better. For instance, a character with 18 strength might be nearly superhuman, while a character with 3 strength might only barely be able to lift their sword off the ground. And in OD&D, a specific and more important ability score is tied to your character class. These scores are known as the prime requisites of a particular character class, and they influence the percentage of an XP bonus that can either increase or reduce the rate at which your character earns XP, depending on how good or bad their prime requisite ability score is. In Lila's case, the prime requisite for the fighting man is strength, so this roll is going to be particularly important. There are also a couple of other important modifiers that depend on your ability scores. A high or low constitution score will affect your hit dice, while a high or low dexterity will affect your accuracy with ranged weapons. Alright, it's the moment of truth, and I've got my 3d6 ready to go. Now know that this is absolutely random, and that you have to call the ability score before you roll it. And while we are given a way to trade points between some prime requisite ability scores, this process is severely limited, so we really are at the mercy of the dice. Okay, rolling abilities for Lila, and here goes nothing. For strength, which is her prime requisite, we get 9. That is definitely suboptimal. Next, for intelligence, we get 8. That is below average even. Okay, now for wisdom, we get 9 again. Poor Lila is not rolling very well. Okay, constitution, we get 15. That is really good. So maybe she's not the strongest, but she's sturdy. Okay, let's move on to dexterity. 11. And finally, her charisma is 14. Alright, so Lila's standout traits are that she's mentally and physically tough, and she's quite charismatic. She'll receive a huge +1 bonus to all of her hit die, and she'll have a much easier time recruiting and maintaining the loyalty of hirelings. Her strength score of 9 just made it into the average range, which means that while she won't receive a bonus to her XP gains, she also won't receive a penalty. Alright, now that we know a little more about Lila, let's head over to Darcy's character sheet. Darcy is also a dwarven woman, which means that she's also a fighting man with the title of veteran, and that she'll start the campaign with 1+1 hit dice and a fighting capability of man +1. All right, let's start rolling now for Darcy's ability scores. And we'll start with her prime requisite, Strength. We get a 8. No! So Darcy is actually going to suffer a penalty to XP in the Fighting Man class. Okay, let's roll for Intelligence next. We get 18? Did we really just roll an 18 for Intelligence on a Fighting Man? Darcy has near superhuman, super dwarven intelligence, I should say. Wow, how are we going to roleplay that? That is incredible. And it can actually play to our advantage because we could trade away intelligence for strength. Okay, we're going to keep that in mind. Wow. I'm going to roll for Darcy's wisdom next, and we get 7. That is also below average. Let's hope for a better score for Constitution. 11. That's average, not bad. Okay, 2 more ability score rolls. We have Dexterity. We get a 12. Nice. And last but certainly not least, Darcy's Charisma is 7. So while we can't literally trade points from intelligence into strength, what we can do, strictly for the purposes of our XP bonus, is count every 2 intelligence points above 9 as 1 strength point. This is because the range for average ability scores goes from 9 to 12, and is a part of our rules for trading points from one stat to another. For the purposes of the XP bonus, we're not allowed to lower any stat below average. That would give Darcy 4 more points in strength, which would raise her strength score to 12, which sits right at the top of the average range, so there'll be no bonus or penalty to experience in the Fighting Man class. And Darcy's standout trait is that she is incredibly intelligent, which makes me think now that she might have known exactly what she was doing that day in the tax collector's office. So we now have ability scores for 2 of the 3 party members we've met, which for me makes for an exciting place to end the session. Thank you so very much for watching the second episode of the Misty Isles campaign, where we are using the Mythic Game Master Emulator to play original Dungeons & Dragons with Chainmail solo. In today's session, we watched as Darcy, the dwarven fighter, bargained for more time to pay off her debts in a tax collector's office in the city of Artois, and as Yalkand the elf sat in the filth of his home, seemingly unbothered either by the mess or by the impending journey. We also determined character classes and ability scores for both Lila and Darcy, our 2 dwarven fighting men, discovering along the way that Lila is formidably tough and charismatic, while Darcy is super intelligent. We also held multiple asides this session, covering key rules in play across both Mythic and OD&D. The time for waiting and preparation is nearly at its end. In the next session, the sun will rise both on the city of Artois and on a motley crew of would-be dungeoneers, prepared to march eastward into the mountains, where they may find death or perhaps glory. Presumably, that is. It could all happen different. With Mythic, you never really can tell. If you've enjoyed today's session, don't forget to hit that like button and to subscribe for more solo RPG content. I'm the Lonely Dungeoneer, and this has been Let's Play Original Dungeons & Dragons with Chainmail solo. Until we meet again, happy delving, and fight on!